This is the Week 6 mini lecture for POLS 230. It consists of a brief review of chapters 11 through 13. Chapter 11, Local Government. There are more than 90,000 local governments in the United States, and they have enormously varied responsibilities, organization, and visibility. County governments are multi-purpose governments that were essentially created as geographic subdivision, branch offices of state government. Their responsibilities generally include law enforcement, courts, record keeping, and maintenance and election oversight. Most county governments have a commissioner form of government, though some have council executive or commission administrator systems. Municipalities are multi-purpose governments formed by associations of citizens. Cities are corporations, legal entities created under state law to provide governance and public services at the local level. Cities use a variety of governance systems. The most common is a mayor-council system, but many cities use a council-manager system, and a smaller number employ a commission system. Special districts are single-purpose governments. They are created to deliver particular services not provided by general-purpose government. School districts created to provide K-12 education services are the most common form of special districts. Unlike state governments, local governments are not sovereign. Dillon's rule defines the relationship between state and local governments, stating that local governments can exercise only the powers granted to them by state government. Home rule is a form of legal authority that many states grant at least some local governments. Home rule essentially means that the state gives the local government the freedom to make decisions with minimal state interference. Although local governments provide critically important programs and services, they tend to be low profile. Voter turnout tends to be much lower in local elections than in state or federal elections. As state governments have become increasingly conservative and Republican, and large cities have become more liberal and democratic, state governments have become more willing to step in and overturn local policies on issues such as the minimum wage, recycling, protections for LGBT people, and cooperation with federal officials on immigration. Chapter 12, the issue of metropolitics. In the United States, most economic and social activity is focused in urban regions that include many independent local governments. Many of the central challenges of governments are regional in nature, but the United States has very few truly regional governments. Sprawl has contributed to the extreme fragmentation of local government and metropolitan regions. Growth patterns characterized by single-use zoning, low-density development, leapfrog development, car-dependent living, and fragmented land use powers have created huge urban areas where people work in one place, live in another, and seek entertainment and recreation in still another. Fragmented government and sprawl have contributed to segregated housing patterns, service and tax inequities between neighboring communities, and difficulties in addressing issues such as transportation infrastructure and environmental concerns. Critics of fragmentation argue that it also creates redundancy and inefficiencies in the provision of public goods and services. To address inefficiency, redundancy, and inequities, champions of the reform perspective advocate a move toward creating more centralized regional governments. Reforms that require big structural changes, such as city-county consolidation, are difficult to achieve. They are not popular with voters and are resisted by local governments reluctant to give up their powers. The result is that true regional governments are very rare in the United States. There are also champions of decentralization who oppose centralizing reforms. The public choice and tie vote models of government argue that having lots of local governments competing to attract citizens consumers is the most effective and efficient way to provide public goods and services. Because of falling populations leading to stagnant tax bases, many rural areas are facing increasing pressure to replace multiple local governments with fewer regional governments. Local government in the United States is essentially built on the 19th century understanding of economic, social, and political activity. Although there clearly are increasing pressures to create regional governments to deal with 21st century challenges, it seems unlikely that any widespread adoption of true regional governments will take place anytime soon. Chapter 13, Education. Education is broadly reviewed as critically important to the economic and social success of individuals, communities, states, and the nation. As such, there is a broad consensus in the United States that education reform is an effective way to address a wide range of social and economic problems. Education has traditionally been within the policy jurisdictions of states and localities. A series of federal initiatives over the past half-century, however, have increased the federal government's role in regulating education. Greater federal government involvement in education has created a great deal of political conflict, as states and localities have pushed back against attempts by Congress to increase the federal role in education. Despite greater federal government policy activity, control over publication remains primarily in the hands of states and localities. Education is the single largest functional expenditure of state budgets, and states and localities provide roughly 90% of the funding for K-12 schools. Equity in education funding across school districts is a subject of long-running political controversy. There's a widespread agreement that public schools could be doing better, and education reform efforts are constantly trying to improve schools' performance. Yet it is not clear how to measure performance. School performance is gauged primarily through comparison of standardized test scores, but different tests are not compatible, and they may say more about the traits of students than about the job schools are doing. One of the dominant education reforms initiatives in recent years is the Common Core state standards. The implementation of these standards was supported by the federal government, but is primarily a project of state governments working cooperatively together. There is a nationwide problem with recruiting and retaining teachers. There is a well-established movement to create alternatives to the traditional public schools, broadly known as school choice. These alternatives include charter schools, voucher programs, and homeschooling. Given the high social, political, and economic stakes, a wide range of organized interest groups participate in education reform politics. These include groups representing parents and teachers, as well as business and professional groups.